Welcome back, everyone. So I've been seeing some videos on YouTube concerning SWR, and I wanted to do a video to kind of discuss that a little bit, because on some of those videos it was mentioned that SWR doesn't really matter, and I kind of agree with that, and I kind of don't, and I'll talk about why in just a second. But I think a lot of times people confuse SWR with resonance, and they're two different things. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today, and we're going to look at some models and do some nano VNA sweeps. So to start, let's talk about SWR. Why does SWR matter? Well, the main reason, there's two main reasons that we should be concerned with SWR. The first is that our radios, modern radios, require an SWR within a certain range, typically less than 1.5 to 1. So my Yaesu FT710, here is the manual for that radio. You can see that it wants an SWR of 1.5 or less. So that's concern number one, because if we don't adhere to that, either the radio is going to fold back power or we're going to damage the finals in the radio. So we want to shoot for 1.5 to 1 or less. Luckily, the FT710 has a tuner that's built in, so most of the time we can tune poorly adjusted antenna to get the SWR below that specification and save the radio from damage. The second consideration is that high SWR at the antenna end of your rig, so all the way out to where your antenna is, whether it's on a mast or on a tower, if you're running coax and your antenna has high SWR, let's say 3 to 1, by the time your signal gets through the coax and back to your radio, there's going to be so much reflection that you're going to lose power. And it doesn't really become a concern until you get above 2 to 1. So 2.5 to 1, 3 to 1 is where the power loss becomes significant and maybe noticeable. Down around 2 to 1 or 1.5 to 1, it's probably not a big concern. In fact, if I can get below 1.5 to 1 on any antenna that I build, I'm usually happy. But the problem is that it may center up at 1.5 to 1, but at the band edges, it may be higher. So something else to be concerned with. So let's look at an antenna that I built. This is a model of that antenna. I call this antenna the droopy dipole. Here's what the model looks like. And here is what it looks like in real life, mounted on top of my tower. So this antenna is just a 20-meter dipole that's linear loaded on the ends. It's center fed, and it's been a pretty good antenna for me. It needs to be higher, but at the height that it is, it's working pretty well. This is the model, and of particular importance, what we want to look at is these members down here. So we can see an impedance of 69.64 ohms, or 69.62 ohms, and then we see a reactance number here, and this happens to be negative reactance 1.63 ohms, and you can see as we move this around away from where this antenna particularly centers up at, you can see those numbers start to change. And right here is the lowest number that I can get for a reactance, which is 0.5149 ohms. And the model, it centers up on the antenna. In real life, it doesn't, and we'll see that in a minute. But the thing I wanted to show here is antennas, when they're too short, they're considered to be capacitive, and when they're too long, they're considered to be inductive. So an antenna that's too short would be going lower in frequency. So if we design this antenna to center up at 14.23 megahertz, an antenna at 14.5 megahertz would be, the same antenna at 14.5 megahertz would be too long, and the same antenna at 13.5 megahertz would be too short. So if we move this away from band center, going lower in frequency, the antenna wants to be longer. And we can see this reactance number, this negative reactance number, increasing. So it's just going to keep going up because the antenna is too short for where the marker is. Negative ohms is capacitance. And if we go positive, we can see this number is going to switch and go positive. So now we're at positive 8.409 ohms. So now it's too long. A positive reactance number is inductance. And we'll center back up. So, interesting fact number one. As you move away from a band center, the antenna becomes either capacitive or inductive. If it's too short, it's capacitive. If it's too long, it's inductive. And that number adds to the base impedance of the antenna. So in this case, when it's at center, 69.62 ohms minus 1.63 ohms is our actual impedance. It's called R plus JX, which is resistance plus reactance, or impedance plus reactance. So this is the model, and let's look at this antenna in real life. So I've got the nano VNA hooked to this droopy dipole, as I call it. It's tough to see because of the lighting, but I've got it plugged into. And for this experiment, we're going to go ahead and use Nano VNA Saver, which is a program that you can run on your Windows PC to allow you to see the data from the Nano VNA on your computer screen, which makes it easier to read. It certainly makes it easier to record. This is a 20-meter antenna. The sweep that I'm doing is from 13.5 megahertz to 14.35 megahertz. And if you look in the middle of the screen, we have a Smith chart. And over here on the outside of the screen, we have a graph. And if I sweep this antenna, it gives you useful data. So this is similar to the model in that we're looking at VSWR of the antenna on the graph, and the impedance is going to be over here on the Smith chart. So as we know, the Smith chart, the ideal place to be is right in the center. It would be 50 ohms, right in the middle of this chart. And you can see right at this point we're pretty close. But what I want to show is this is the actual antenna, and if you look at our numbers, you can see they're relatively close to what we modeled. We're showing 62.2 ohms with a reactance number of negative 5.09 ohms. So it's slightly capacitive. But here's the interesting part. This is centered up at the lowest SWR that we can see on this antenna, but as I go higher in frequency, you can see the reactance number going down. Now we're at 1.1, now we're at 651 milliohms. The small m is milli, big M is mega. 249, 123. So that was probably the smallest number, 123, minus 123 milliohms. Almost no reactive component at all. And you can see that the SWR is slightly higher than it was where it was centered up. So what that tells us is that this is the resonant point of this antenna. The resonant point of a resonant antenna is where there is the least amount of reactance. So in this case, it's 14.0865 megahertz, which is slightly higher SWR than the center point. So reactance is a good indicator of resonance. When you're dealing with a resonant antenna, you want to find the point on the antenna where the reactance is the least amount, the smallest amount, and that's your resonant point. It's not necessarily the point of lowest SWR. Resonance and SWR are two different things. So this is important when you start dealing with NFEDs, because an NFED has very high impedance. We run that through a transformer. And there's a lot of complex reactance going on in an NFED. But what you end up with at the end of the day is a total impedance, a total R plus JX, that's in the neighborhood of 50 ohms that your transmitter will be comfortable with. Interestingly enough, when you model antennas with a nano VNA, a good thing to do is to put up the reactance trace, because that will tell you where it's resonant. And it can be important because sometimes your tuning can be off. And we're constrained to a 50 ohm match. We have to try and achieve 50 ohms so that our transmitter will be happy. Either that, or we have to find an impedance that we can run through a transformer to get us to 50 ohms so that the transformer is happy. Three different concepts: SWR, resonance, and reactance, which gives us a total impedance that may or may not be comfortable at our radio. It just depends what that number happens to be. So we always want to try for 50 ohms. Sometimes you just can't get there. Sometimes an antenna is just a problem child. I can give you an example in that a vertical with a lot of ground radials is going to put your total impedance below 50 ohms. It may be 30 ohms, it may be 27 ohms. But that antenna is tuned perfectly to radiate the best with that 30 ohm match. And sometimes you have to bend over backwards to make your transmitter happy, because that's where that antenna wants to work the best. So sometimes you just can't get there. Sometimes you can. Sometimes you can play with the feed point on an antenna, or run it through a transformer, or bend the legs a little bit to get that match of 50 ohms that we need to keep the transmitter happy. But really, all we're doing at the end of the day is we're trying to get the match below 1.5 to 1 all the way through the band, at both ends of the band where we're going to operate. And if we can achieve that, great. If we can't, well, then maybe we have to employ the tuner and the radio to get us there. But that's really what I wanted to cover today, is just don't think that SWR and resonance are the same thing. They're not. They could be off by a large amount. They could be centered up. If your antenna just happens to be playing nice that day, your resonance point and your SWR point might line up together on the graph at the same frequency. It doesn't have to be that way. They can be separated by 100 kilohertz. And it doesn't matter as long as your SWR is below 1.5 everywhere you're going to operate. So yes, SWR does matter in that we want to save the radio, and we want to try and keep our losses at a minimum. So if you're using coax, like most people, like I am, I don't use twin lead, then we want to keep it below 3 to 1 for sure, 2 to 1 if we can. And from there, we just want to keep the radio happy. Questions? Leave me some comments, and thanks for watching.